Doctors, rated #1 by Reasons There's a Finger in Your Ass magazine. Doctors have held a position of high esteem in our society for generations, as you can see in the 1930s film Men of Medicine.
In every U.S. city and town, there is one house that everybody knows, the doctor's. Available here are the services of the man who, by law, is privileged to practice the most respected of all professions.
Yes, only doctors have the privilege of shoving a stick into a child's mouth and diagnosing a condition that we in the 1930s know as gross throat. The cure for it is drowning. But while medicine may be the most respected of all professions, it is important to know that not everyone has the same experience when they visit a doctor.
I think I would have been treated completely differently if I had been male.
You'll hear doctors and nurses like, oh, they're just exaggerating,
dramatic,
you know, and not really listening to them because it's a black person. But if it's like a white person, it's just like, oh my God, like this is serious.
It's true. If you are a woman and or a person of colour in the US, you may well have a very different relationship to our healthcare system than a white man. So frankly, who better to talk at you for 20 minutes about this than me, the whitest of white men? Look, I get a sunburn watching the Travel Channel. I'm a walking side of donuts, pale, filled with cake, and found at every farmer's market in the northeast. But this is a discussion that we need to have, because while the vast majority of doctors are doing hard work with sometimes limited resources, bias in medicine is a serious issue, and while it's not the only factor in determining health outcomes, it can have a massive effect. So tonight, let's talk about bias in medicine in two specific areas. First, sex, and then race. And in the words of every therapist I've ever had, let's start with sex. Historically, women's bodies have always been fraught with judgment and misconceptions.
Mom, can I go swimming with Peggy tomorrow after school?
No, it's not a good idea the first 2 or 3 days of your period. You might get chilled and catch cold.
Oh, that's right. Peggy, of course I can't go swimming. You know I've got the curse.
Yeah, Peggy! What are you, an idiot? She's got the curse. She can't swim. She'll fucking sink. It's true. In the 50s, women referred to their period as the curse. But that's not all. Breasts were the haunted mountains. Butts were the valley of doom. Pregnancy was the happening. And giving birth was called the Babadook. It was a very, very scary time to be a woman. And look, things have clearly improved since then, but women can still face an uphill battle to get quality healthcare. There are many, many studies showing this. For instance, they found that women were less likely to be referred for knee replacements than men. If they're over 50 and critically ill, they were less likely to receive life-saving interventions. And when going to the ER with urgent abdominal pain, women were less likely to receive any pain medicine. Just listen to one doctor sum up how too many in her profession treat female patients.
I think that a lot of times women's symptoms, especially pain, are attributed to emotional imbalance or, you know, women being hysterical or crying wolf about their pain, and that's absolutely wrong.
Yeah, of course it is. The only time it's understandable for a doctor not to hear a woman's complaints about pain is if she's calling into the office and she's got AT&T, because the calls keep dropping out. Boom, business, Daddy! I've got you again! Business baby woke up all cranky. Wah, wah, wah. I'm airing my dirty diapers in public again. Wah, wah. Wah, wah. I'm high maintenance. Wah. And look, while some of this may have to do with implicit bias on doctors' parts, there is also a systemic problem here, where doctors may literally know less about women's bodies. Because historically, medicine has studied men's bodies, which here means those assigned male at birth, as a proxy for all bodies. And as one researcher who studied this will tell you, the reason for that was incredibly dumb.
There's this assumption that you are me with pesky hormones.
Oh, with pesky hormones.
The idea is that the fundamental things are similar between you and me. So that, ironically, the best way to study you is to study me. Because when
you don't have pesky hormones.
Right. We're studying all the fundamental things in you without this sort of nuisance stuff.
Yeah. Women are full of nuisance stuff, which is why medicine has long chosen to believe that women are just hormonal men. Also, children are tiny men, dogs are furry men, trees are big, hard, still men, birds are men who can fly, fish are men who can glub, and volcanoes are men who, for some reason, ejaculate lava. And this idea that women are just men with pesky hormones has led to some woman-shaped blind spots in medicine. For decades, women were basically excluded from medical research trials, in part because of a concern that their menstrual cycles would complicate the results, which you would think would be all the more reason to include them in tests, because women are half the population and can respond to treatment or drugs very differently. And in some cases, their exclusion was utterly ridiculous, as this news report from the 90s shows.
In 1990, the Journal of the National Cancer Institute published this report, which looked at the impact of diet on estrogen metabolism and its links to cancer of the breast and uterus. All of the subjects were men.
It's true. They studied a way to prevent cancer of the uterus on people who did not have one. That's ridiculously unhelpful. It's like studying healthy conflict resolution and only surveying the Real Housewives of New York. They've resolved no conflicts. Luann's still pissed off about Dorinda's fish room. Ramona's turned up uninvited at Barbara's clam bake. And Tinsley's furious because they all laughed at the fact that she froze her dead dog. The group's dynamic is still a mess, and the show's all the better for it. And when you have the male body as the default reference and doctors who might not take women's pain seriously, the consequences can be deadly. Take heart attacks. You're conditioned to think of them looking like they do on TV all the time. You know, people grabbing their chest and then falling over. But for many women, that is not what they look like. Instead, their heart attacks present with subtler symptoms like pain in the back or jaw, nausea, and unusual fatigue. And lots of doctors miss that. Just look what happened to Catherine Leon, who went to the ER with serious heart problems and was told this.
The young doctor came in, very condescending, thought I was just a drama queen. And he said, "It's not my job to tell you what's wrong with you. It's my job to tell you what it's not, and it's not your heart." And that was it. I was like, well, what do I do next? And he's like, you go home.
Wow. That doctor managed to find literally the only time that telling someone to go home is bad advice. Because having a bad day at work, just go home. At a party, stuck next to a guy who wants to talk about Bitcoin, go home. You're on second and your buddy grounds a single into left field. The outfielder picks it up and throws to first as you round third, but you realise he's overthrown. Go home! Go home! Go home now! But Catherine Leon was having a heart attack. She should not have been sent home, and she's by no means alone. One study found that women who came to the hospital with heart attack symptoms were 7 times more likely than men to be misdiagnosed and sent home from the hospital, which is terrible. The only thing a woman should be 7 times more likely to do is recognise those Real Housewives references from earlier. And you know what? Even that is not remotely okay. That show is both a nuanced and searing portrayal of wealth, power and loneliness in Manhattan, or universal themes that should transcend whatever superficial boxes in which it's currently confined. It's our Much Ado About Nothing, and Andy Cohen is our Shakespeare. But that's not the point. It's a very good point. In fact, it's an excellent point, but it's not the point we're making here, which is sex and gender bias can clearly distort medical outcomes, but they are not the only forms of bias that can do that. And now, if I may quote the inside of Donald Trump's head when energy at one of his rallies seems to be flagging, let's get to the racism stuff. Because there is a huge disparity in life expectancy between black and white Americans, particularly for black men. In fact, when one study tried to quantify what is called the mortality gap, they found some shocking numbers, which this documentary chose to illustrate in the most jarring possible way.
We found over 83,000 excess deaths per year in the African American community alone.
83,000 excess deaths each year. That's the equivalent of a major airliner filled with black passengers falling out of the sky every single day, every year.
Okay, but that's such a weirdly specific way to put that. You don't need to take a number that's already a disaster and put it in terms of another disaster. 83,000 excess deaths is like 4 double-decker buses driving into each other every 6 hours. It's 32 hot air balloons exploding every minute for a week. It's the death of Princess Diana 83,000 times. I get it. It's pretty bad, I get it. Now Clearly, there are systemic factors contributing to that number, but even just when it comes to contact with the healthcare system, there can be appalling disparities. There are, again, many studies showing African Americans have a lower likelihood of receiving recommended care for everything from pneumonia to hip fractures to multiple cancers. And while there's no one cause for these disparities, it certainly doesn't help that, as a study of med students and doctors found just 3 years ago, misinformation about African American patients is rampant.
The study found some doctors believed there are biological differences between the two races. For example, 25% of doctor residents thought blacks have thicker skin.
Holy shit! You do not expect to hear that at a medical school. You barely expect to hear it yelled across a table by a racist grandfather at Thanksgiving. What are you talking about, Grandpa? His skin isn't thicker than yours, and even if it were, that is not why you didn't vote for him. And that is not the only insane belief that study found. 14% of second-year med students agreed that black people's nerve endings are less sensitive than whites, which they obviously aren't, and 70% believe that black people's blood coagulates more quickly than whites, which it obviously doesn't. And at that point, I wouldn't be surprised to learn 86% of them believe that Irish jizz is green on holidays. Not even just St. Patrick's Day, all holidays, even Yom Kippur. That's the worst time to ejaculate. Now, it is impossible to say exactly where they came by those beliefs, but medical textbooks are not immune from bias. This nursing textbook was available until just 2 years ago, when it was pulled after it emerged that it featured statements like, and I quote, "Hispanics may believe that pain is a form of punishment and that suffering must be endured if they are to enter heaven. African Americans believe suffering and pain are inevitable, and Native Americans may pick a sacred number when asked to rate pain on a numerical pain scale." And you expect that a textbook might have typos or outdated information. You do not expect it to basically say, Hispanics think God is kinky and Native Americans will tell you wizard numbers. And misconceptions like those can have tangible effects on treatment. Just think about it. If a quarter of all medical residents think that black people have thicker skin and nurses have been told that they think suffering is inevitable, that might lead to black patients' pain being treated differently, which happens. And I actually think that Wanda Sykes summed this up best.
Because of racism, black people, we don't even get our hands on opioids. They don't even give them to us. White people get opioids like they Tic Tacs. It amazes me how many opioids you motherfuckers have. I had a double mastectomy. You know what they sent my black ass home with? Ibuprofen.
Okay, first, from now on, Advil should absolutely call itself ibuprofen. That is non-negotiable. That has to happen. But second, that's by no means unusual. One recent analysis found that black patients were 34% less likely to be prescribed opioids for pain than white patients with similar conditions. And while there are a lot of good reasons to prescribe fewer opioids, my patients are black is just not one of them. And the danger is, if you consistently have bad experiences with healthcare, you might be less inclined to seek help that you need in the future. Just listen to this woman who was diagnosed with lupus describe how she was impacted by the response from doctors when she sought pain treatment.
There was just this belief that I was making things up, that what I was saying wasn't real, that I must be seeking drugs or selling the drugs or some such thing.
Is that really what people would, that's what you were getting in the doctor's office?
Absolutely. And so what happens is you start to develop a ton of fear around going to the doctor.
Yeah, of course you'd be frightened to go to the doctor if you thought they'd treat you like a drug dealer. I'm terrified of them, and the worst thing doctors ever say to me is, Mr. Oliver, you're 42 and you should no longer need to be bribed with a lollipop to get a flu shot. But I want one. I want a Wowie Pop. I've been very brave. Give me a Wowie Pop. And look, I'm not saying that all doctors are racist or sexist, because they obviously aren't. But people have biases, and doctors are people. And they may have come up in a system that, intentionally or not, has often discounted the experiences of a major portion of the population. And their biases, explicit or implicit, have life or death consequences. And there's perhaps no starker expression of where sex and race can negatively impact healthcare outcomes than maternal mortality. Currently, the United States has the highest rate of maternal mortality in the developed world, which is already terrible, but it gets even worse for black women.
If you're a woman of color in this country, especially if you're black, your odds of dying in childbirth are 3 to 4 times higher on average in our country.
Why? Because you're not talking about access to healthcare. You're not talking about money or education.
No, and this is going to be hard to hear. We believe black women less when they express concerns about the symptoms they're having, particularly around pain.
Yeah, and that is hard to hear. But it is worth really underscoring what he just said there. These racial disparities exist even when you control for socioeconomic factors like education or insurance status. We are literally disbelieving black women to death. And that is appalling enough in theory, but it's heartbreaking in practice. Take Kira Johnson, who gave birth to a son only for things to go horribly wrong. Her husband said that she waited hours for a CT scan, and by the time doctors took the situation seriously, it was too late. She died in surgery, and to this day, her husband wonders what he could have done differently.
I sit awake at nights thinking, man, like maybe I should have grabbed somebody by their collar, right? Maybe I should have turned the table over, right? Would that have made a difference? I definitely thought about the whole issue of I didn't want to be perceived not only as angry, but an angry black man, right? I'm not the smallest guy in the world. And what that would mean and how we would be perceived and how we would be treated as a result of that perception. When this first happened, I would get the question a lot, well, do you think it was because she was black? Do you think it would be different if Kira was white or was a different color? And the way I answer that question is, the simple fact that you have to ask that question is a problem.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge fucking problem. Because that's absolutely devastating. A woman no one would listen to, and a man who feared that if he spoke up, he'd be judged for the colour of his skin. Look, I don't think anyone in their right mind would be comfortable with the idea of someone getting worse medical care because of their race or sex. So, given that we all agree on that, what can be done here? Well, ideally, we'd simply figure out a way for no one to ever get sick again, thus making trips to the doctor an embarrassment of the past. Like VCRs or MTV giving out something called the Michael Jackson Video Vanguard Award. Hold on, 2019? They're still doing that? Is that a different Michael Jackson? It must be, right? Why drag Missy Elliott into this shit? But there are also concrete measures that the medical community can take here. Standardizing care is a good first step. Since 2006, California has cut its rate of women dying in childbirth by more than half, in part by instituting protocols for maternal care. Some hospitals there now do things like quantifying blood loss after birth by gathering the sponges and pads and weighing them on a scale. That way, the doctor's potential biases are removed from the equation, because if a patient is bleeding too much, the scale will say so. But that is just one example to address one very specific problem. Clearly, we need to think much bigger here, and I know I am just not the best vehicle for this message. What we really need is someone who can speak with authority from real experience here, and luckily, I know just the person. Please welcome Wanda Sykes! Wanda, I gotta say, Wanda, exactly, Wanda, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you're here.
I bet you are.
Yeah. It's just because I was a bit worried that I might be a bit too white to give advice on this subject.
Well, that's because you are.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
You're real white.
I am, yeah.
I bet you clap on the 1 and the 3, don't you?
I honestly wouldn't know how else to do it. Yeah.
So you just gonna have me stand here?
Oh, would you rather?
Yeah, I would.
Oh,
I mean,
okay. Sure, please.
You get to sit. Let me sit.
All right. Should I?
Better.
Should I just crouch then? Should I?
You can go.
I can go. Okay. All right. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to Last Sad Tonight with Spectacles McDorky. Okay, look. If you're a woman or a person of color, going to the doctor can be rough. Been there, done that, got the ibuprofen. But there's some things we can do. First, doctors and med students should get bias training. I know that doesn't sound like fun, but it's one of those things that's not fun, but you should do it anyway. Like reading with your kids. Trust me. Trust me, you don't want to hear that your child has a reading problem and it's you. Second, we need more diversity in the medical field. We need more non-white doctors in actual hospitals, not just the ones made up by Shonda Rhimes. And finally, until we do those first two things, you've got to advocate for yourself. And if that doesn't work, don't worry, I've got a backup plan. It's called Bring a White Man. Basically, if your doctor's ignoring you, just bring a white man to repeat everything you said. And if you're thinking, Wanda, where the fuck am I gonna find one of those? Don't worry. I've got a white friend who loves complaining to doctors, and he's recorded some messages you can use. So let's say you're having a heart attack, and they're not listening. Just take out your phone and show your doctor this.
Hey, you know what? I'm having a heart attack, but it's not like, whoa, no. No, it's a lady heart attack. I'm having a lady heart attack.
They're not sending that man home. They're not sending him home. They're giving him an EKG, an MRI, and a BLT if he asks for it. Look, and it's not just heart attacks. I got Larry to record messages for every occasion.
My elbow hurts when I do this, you know, like a whipping motion. I can't bend it. I cannot squat. Oy, my uterus is killing me. I've got some pesky hormones today. Shouldn't have to say this, but my skin thickness is pretty much the same as everybody else's. It's hard for me to explain what's going on with my ass, but I'm gonna tell you something. It hurts, okay? Side to side. And the crack. And it's like, I don't know if it's coming from the crack, and that's why the sides hurt, or if it's coming from the sides, and that's why the crack hurts. Oh, no, I can't go swimming. I've got the curse.
Yeah! You can find all of those and more at what'slarrysproblem.com.
Oh, that's so great, Wanda. But let me just ask quickly. What if a doctor still ignores you?
Oh, don't worry. I got Larry to record the white person's 7-word mating call. Check it out.
I'd like to speak to your supervisor.
Boom! Conversation over.
It's done. It's all over.
Done.
That's great, Wanda. Thank you so much.